Hi, welcome everyone to our Vercel community live stream. My name is Jacob Paris, and I'm joined here with Amy from the Vercel community team. We're streaming this live out to X and YouTube, but if you want to participate in the chat, come on into our community at community.vercel.com, click going on the event, and that'll unlock the chat. At the end of the session, we're going to have a little time for Q&A, so feel free to drop some questions in the chat along the way.
And I just want to remind everyone to stick to our community code of conduct. Just be nice to everyone. It's basically the summary there. And with that out of the way, I want to introduce our guest today, Josh Gross. He is CEO and founder at Planetary. And welcome, Josh. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Jacob. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on for us.
Oh, happy to be here.
All right, I'll let you introduce yourself and take it away with SEO in the era of AI everything.
Cool. Well, pleasure to be here. It's been an interesting topic of conversation amongst a lot of our peers and our clients. I run a digital agency. We do a lot of design, development, site stewardship for our clients. And one of the topics of conversations that's been coming up incredibly frequently has been, how do we navigate this world of AI search where folks are not necessarily clicking through to links at the top of the search results anymore, or finding out about your company, your products in really unusual ways. I mean, we've had clients come to us because ChatGPT has recommended us to them. And so that's been an interesting experience for us to navigate ourselves. And so with all of that in mind, we've been really trying to figure out, how do we navigate SEO in this new era? How do we figure out how to really interact with these AI engines and deal with indexing, if you will, and content and copy and site structure and site architecture in a way that still lives within the world of SEO, because that's not going away entirely, but also works with these new answer engines. And with that in mind, I have a bunch of things that we've kind of figured out, a few things that we've gleaned from other folks who've managed to figure some of this out in terms of how we navigate this, and especially how we navigate this with the tools that we love to use. Our team primarily uses Next.js, Sanity, Vercel as our core toolkit, excuse me. And with that, we found a lot of ways to sort of navigate this new universe.
All right, I want to get out of your way so that you can talk about everything you have to share. So let's add your presentation to the stage, and Jacob and I will get out of your way.
Thank you. Cool. Yeah. As I said, this is navigating SEO in the era of AI search. I introduced myself, but very briefly, founder of Planetary, digital agency. I've been building for the web for 24 years, which makes me feel very old. I started in the era of font tags, pre-CSS. I do, in fact, miss font tags. They were great. CSS is wonderful. Font tags were fun. We build sites and apps designed for performance and longevity. We are partners to our clients. We want to make sure that what we're recommending for them are things that we would recommend for ourselves. And we're building for things with the goal that they can use these sites for the next 5-10 years. We have clients that have been using the site we built for them for a decade plus. And mind you, I don't always recommend that, but hey. But let's talk about SEO. You know, the core of technical SEO is much easier. You have things like Next.js. They have a ton, it has a ton of built-in bits and pieces for metadata, for site speed optimization, for performance optimization. But with AI, you have now these conversational responses that are sourcing from your content and have fundamentally altered how folks are navigating search. I mean, you have, historically, you have a couple of things really to worry about when it comes to search. You have your search engine marketing, which is a race to the top in terms of spend, in terms of a race to the bottom in terms of how folks are competing against one another for the placement in the ad boxes at the top of Google search. And then, of course, you have your search results themselves and competing for keywords, competing for backlinks, making sure that you're optimizing every square inch of your site to try and rank more highly. But now you have this new pillar, this new element of answer engines, of the AI search, that really kind of fundamentally are overview. They provide the overviews, the things that you see. Let's see if I could find the slide. The things that you see at the top of Google. They're the things that ChatGPT comes back with all of the cited sources. You'll often see them referred to as answer engines, generative engines, AI search. There's a whole bunch of different terms. And you also see terms like AEO and GEO, answer engine optimization, generative engine optimization. And you'll sometimes see them referred to as the same thing. Sometimes you'll see them referred to as two separate ideas. But fundamentally, they're the same idea. The two different names for the same thing. And what that means, what it is that, traditional SEO is a focus on traffic, links, keywords, like I mentioned. AEO and or GEO, whatever you want to really call it, are centered around answers and context. So rather than, for example, putting in a keyword of, top 3 restaurants in New York, you'll have someone asking the question, what are the top restaurants in New York? And the way that these answer engines will index this information is different than the way a search engine will. There are, of course, there's similarities, and certain things still apply between both of these approaches, but we need to approach this AEO work a little bit differently than we've approached the traditional SEO. As I said, here's a great example of like how to cook perfect rice, and Google provides this AI overview at the very top of the page above all of the other search results, and it cites some sources. So it gives you a response, and then it links you really to a couple of sources, and you'll notice really you only fundamentally at the top of these searches now have 2, maybe 3 links at the very top of the page, because it's citing those sources and it's pulling the best information it can from the sources that provide the best context. You also have that with things like ChatGPT, where I can search like things to do in New York City this weekend. And it'll cite it from multiple sources. It'll search the web, and then it'll pull out a summary. And in that, you'll see where I highlighted in red a bunch of links to the different sources that it's citing from. And so, again, you only have 4 or 5 links at the top of that folks are seeing. Oftentimes, they may not click any of these links because it provides all that information right there for them. And fundamentally, we want folks still to click through. Unless your goal is really just providing information, you ultimately want folks to visit your site to purchase a product, learn more about your business, buy your services, etc. So AEO sources data from one or more different places, builds an answer, provides a complete response, like I just said. The number of sources are linked but limited, and if fundamentally you're not an authoritative resource, and I'll get to that in a second, it's just not going to source you, and you're going to lose out on the opportunity to be linked to, and frankly, to have users go to your site. And so what is the impact of this? Users are reading the summaries, and they're getting the answers they need. They're closing the search. They're moving on to the next thing. That's happening more and more frequently. Folks will hit a Google search, and you can see there's statistics around this. Folks will search for something, look at the response they need at the very top of the page. That's it. They won't click on anything else. They won't navigate away from the Google search. Sometimes they'll click through the sources so they can learn more. It provides the AI provides a snippet of the information, but they want to find more detail. And that's where the opportunity lies, is really just trying to find opportunities to be the authoritative resource for certain types of questions. And the questions ideally being ones that folks will want to dig more deeply into, at least some portion of them. From this, of course, there's site architecture is still first and foremost the most important thing. It's true for SEO. It's going to be true for AEO. There's content architecture, the site speed, metadata, all create different forms of authority. Of course, things like backlinks still apply here. I'm not going to touch on that much in this, but some of these traditional SEO tactics do still very much apply. But fundamentally, you want to create authority, and you want to create a site that responds quickly and provides things in a structure that the answer engines can get quickly, pull that information as quickly as possible, which means loading the site as fast as possible, and have the page structured in such a way that it can find context for a given question or a given query, and then get an answer that matches that context. So site performance and rendering, you want to ideally have things server-side rendered, pre-rendered as quickly as possible so that the site loads as quickly as possible. You want to structure the information in such a way that these answer engines can read it. Things like conversational queries, FAQs, summaries, callouts are all really useful because the A's can pull that context, and it provides essentially the short piece of information that it already needs, and it doesn't need to paraphrase too far from that. And then, of course, recency and freshness. A lot of these queries are going to be time-oriented. A lot of these things are based on providing the most up-to-date information. You have all of these things have a cutoff. All of these things will search the web to add additional context that's more recent. So you want things to be contextually recent and fresh, whether that means providing articles with regular updates, whether that means regularly updating the content on different pages, making sure that you have things date and timestamp so that they appear recent and fresh and they're worth indexing, and not something that was for 2024 and when somebody's querying for 2025 or 2026, given that we're most of the way through the year at this point. So how do we actually do any of these optimizations? What are the options here? There's a few different things. We often use, as I mentioned, Vercel and Next.js. That's a core part of our toolkit. There's a bunch of different ways that we approach the thinking around this that we found work and are easy to implement, which is really key when we're trying to move quickly to make these updates. The first one being taking advantage of ISR, Incremental Static Regeneration, making sure that we're server-side rendering and pre-rendering pages as much as we can. Also, of course, being able to then revalidate them when we make changes without rebuilding a whole site. Taking advantage of Vercel's edge network, so being able to deliver content as close as possible to, in this case, the bots that are querying and scraping from your site. Taking advantage of the web application firewall that Vercel offers, the WAF. There's a few different reasons why ways that we can use this. Some of which include, of course, blocking bots. Other ones include setting up things like redirects that may not be as obvious a use for a firewall, but are really handy. And then the last one, taking advantage of the AI gateway. You have Perplexity, OpenAI, dozen other models that you can call from. And AI Gateway is great because it can just call out to any of these and gives you the ability to test different models for different use cases, which I'll get to in a minute. But they're really helpful to build summarizations, call outs, FAQs. So I'm going to go through each one of these, and then I'll have a few code examples at the end for a couple key things I want to highlight. So ISR should be familiar to most folks who've worked with Next.js before. It was in the pages router. It's, of course, still in the app router. It's gotten better because you can actually do partial catching of individual fetch requests, which is nice because you can revalidate those on a case-by-case basis. But basically, net, you can actually refresh content very quickly on a route or tag basis. So if you have something across multiple pages, you can set it up as a tag. You can revalidate it, so only those pages are rebuilt as necessary. Great for things like content recency. If you want to regularly update dates or pull statistics from an API endpoint, update recommendations to different products based on the current year or season, and you don't have to rebuild the whole site. It's rebuilding those portions, those elements, those pages. Of course, things like rebuilding sitemaps, regularly updating metadata, regenerating summaries on a regular basis so they stay fresh, which I'll get to in a minute. All really great ways to use ISR. I mean, we put this to use constantly, especially when we're tying it into headless CMS like Sanity, where someone wants to publish updated content. We just want to rebuild the one page. If they're publishing to one page, or if they're updating navigation, we'll be able to update the navigation universally. But things like that, where we have a little more control, more granular control over different sections of a site. Of course, we have the edge network. I pulled this from Vercel's site, but it's a really great visualization of all of the different points of presence and the edge regions that they have. Fundamentally, what that means is that you're able to deliver content as close as possible to any of these server regions where the bots are pulling from. So, you know, US East 1, which anybody who's ever done anything with Amazon or Amazon adjacent is familiar with. You want to be able to provide something to wherever these bots are querying from, whether it's US East 1, US West 1, et cetera, et cetera. You want to be able to provide that data as fast as possible. The shorter the response time, both time to first byte and actually rendering the content, the better, because these AEs want to pull data as fast as possible to produce a response as fast as possible. If your site takes half a second plus to load, the AE may just move on to a different source, and you lose out on that opportunity simply because your site takes too long to load and pull that data. You have the web application firewall, i.e. the WAF, which is great for controlling traffic and monitoring traffic on your site. There are, of course, ways to completely block AI bots from parts or your entire site. There's been cases where we've done that for particular clients that don't want bots indexing or ingesting their content. You can also use that for, like I said, partial parts of the site. If you want to block a bot from indexing certain parts of a site that you don't feel are long-term relevant or even near-term relevant, you can do that. But more interestingly, and the things that I have found and our team has found particularly useful are things like setting up nearly instant redirects. So if some content moves, if we want to redirect 2024 article or 2023 article to a 2026 article about the latest products, we can do that straight from the WAF, which is really nice. We can rate limit particular users. So whether or not it's bots, it could be anybody else. We can rate limit them based on heuristics to reduce load on third-party APIs or our database so that we can ensure that the site's loading as quickly as possible, barring other optimizations, of course. And then, of course, things like challenge mode to keep certain information user visible, but limit a bot's ability to actually access certain information. It's great when you don't want that index, but you still want it readily visible to users. If, for example, they click through to that from another link on your site, but you don't want that information being ingested. Like I mentioned, you can block bots entirely. You can log it. Some services choose to do this proactively. Vercel gives you the option to kind of control it with a default off. We've used this a few different times. It's really handy in certain instances. And then, of course, like I said, you can also set up these redirects. And this is really nice because it just means that you don't have to redeploy the site. You don't have to have something sitting in front of the site to set up redirects. It's just built into Vercel. So we have a site that's deployed. We want to redirect an article. We don't need to go to the CMS and publish something. We don't need to push a new deployment. We can toggle this on and we can toggle it back off again if we need to later on. Great for temporary promotions, things like that. And then this is my favorite, using the AI gateway. Honestly, using bots, AI to feed AI. For better or for worse, that's the universe we're in. But there's a few interesting ways to do it that are meaningful, useful, not just generating slop. And my personal favorite from that is really just generating summaries and callouts on the fly. So Vercel, just for folks who haven't worked with it before, Vercel's AI Gateway unifies a wide variety of these different models and providers into a single API, whether that's calling, like I mentioned before, Perplexity, OpenAI, XAI. You can call any of these models, and they've unified the API so that you really just have to specify the model, and you can generate text or a number of other things straight from the AI, straight from those APIs without having to set up each library individually. And if you want to experiment with different models, it's really nice. This, for example, is how you use a generate text call through the AI gateway. You can see I specify the model, in this case GPT-5, the temperature, the tokens, and then you can provide the prompt. And that's it. I mean, that's all there is to it. It's really nice. I could swap out that model for a completely different one without changing anything else in this call, and it will still work exactly the same way. Which means I can experiment with different models very quickly to see what the results are. I can tweak the prompts and get the best result I need. It enables you to do things like this. So this call out, and I'll show you a little bit more about this in a minute, but this call out, for example, was automatically selected based on a section of an article about organic modern furniture. The summary of that call out was generated automatically using the AI gateway. And then it gets tied into the article. So, for example, if I wanted to have someone write articles for my store and I wanted to have it tie into recommended products, I don't even necessarily need to have that person select individual products they want to specify. I can have the AI decide which products are most appropriate, generate some context around why those are relevant, select the particular sentence or section of the article that is relevant to that call out, and add this to the page automatically. This is really great for things like answer engines where you're providing contextual information as a part of the actual content, and it's meaningful, it makes sense in context, and it doesn't look like something that's been added to the page and is not useful, relevant, important. This is how that's implemented. This is all there is to it. Basically, we just take the article sections, we've broken them out into individual content sections. We pass it to a prompt. In this case, we've told it to write a little bit of information, give it a list of products, write a little summary, and out comes this. And we can do this for any section on the page. We have in this particular demo, we have several of these on one page, and it's really nice because they slot in between different sections of the content. One of the other things is being able to generate summaries. So these answer engines really like being able to get contextual snippets of information, and especially for something like a 2,000 word, 3,000 word, 5,000 word article that you may have, it's a lot of information to ingest, and it oftentimes will be a much longer form version of that information. But what you could do is provide a summary at the top of that page, paragraph, a few sentences, and you don't have to write these yourself. You can have these automatically generated. And I'll show you how in a second. But the cool thing about this is you can actually provide the, if you increase the temperature of the AI, you can get more variety out of it. So each one of these can be different, and you can regenerate them on a regular basis. So you can keep the content fresh, keep the content recent. You can even pull in additional, more updated statistics to include, if it's relevant, if it's important to that information. You can pull in updated data on a regular basis, have it summarize this, pull out key information, and then have that rotate on a weekly, monthly, bi-yearly basis, whatever you want, so that the content stays fresh, the summaries are relevant, and it doesn't require additional overhead from your team. You're not having to have somebody write an additional piece of content on a regular basis and rotate it out. It just becomes something that happens automatically with revalidation. The other one, and this might be one of the most valuable of these recommendations, frankly, is creating FAQs from long form content. So you can actually take an entire article, feed it through the AI gateway to provide to generate one of these FAQ blocks, have it spit out essentially the questions and the answers based on the content you've provided it, and then include that at the bottom of the page, or include that as a section somewhere in the center, in the middle of the page. Contextual, Q&A format information is really valuable. Again, someone could ask, what is organic modern seating? And right here is we have a perfect example of an answer that's contextual, meaningful, based on the content that was already written, so it's not generating something out of thin air. And in this case, we had to generate 5 different Q&As, but you can have it do more, less, have it change dynamically based on the length of the article. And all we did to do that was this. Gave it a model, gave it a temperature. In this case, we set a little bit below 1. So it's a little, it'll be less creative and more directly based on the content we're providing it. And then we gave it some context. We gave it a little bit of a Q&A direction, and then we just fed it the article content. In this case, we fed it the first 2,000 characters of the article content. If you have a 10,000 character article, you can provide the whole thing. I mean, you know, the context windows are pretty big and totally fine. But it spits this out, and then you can just simply format it into this, which is great. And you can do this for any number of articles, pages, product pages, as long as there's enough context that you could feed something into here, into the AI, it can spit out something like this. And again, this contextual Q&A format information is wonderful for getting these answer engines to actually use your context, use your information as a part of its responses. And then lastly, like, how do you measure the results? I mean, you know, talking about like, how do we get these AEs to actually use your context and link out to your site, but how do you measure that whether or not this is actually working? Honestly, this is still very much in its infancy. There's a few tools out there which I'll walk through. You can monitor things like referrers in Google Analytics with varying levels of success. But the tools out there actually are kind of helpful. You have things like Otterly. You can do a search prompt overview. It'll see whether or not your product, your brand is showing up in those questions, in those responses. You have things like Peak, very similar. You can have it search prompts, mentions. You even do competitor research to see how they're performing in comparison. And then another one called Profound. All of these are very similar in that fundamentally you feed it some prompts, and then ideally you see over time whether or not your brand is showing up as parts of responses in these prompts. It's not perfect. It's not necessarily even the best way of measuring these things, but it does give you at least a glimpse into whether or not the tactics that you're using are productive. And that's the gist. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other things that we can explore, and our team has been actively exploring. There's a lot of experimentation happening. It's still super early, and everybody's kind of just fumbling their way through the dark here. But things like using inferred location and edge compute, like Vercel's edge compute, to return more dynamic local content. So if someone's searching from Phoenix, Arizona about local restaurants, hopefully, ideally, you'd be able to potentially infer their location, provide them more contextual information, at least provide that to the bot, which would then provide that back to the user. Whether or not those things actually work, we're still kind of playing with here. We could also expand the breadth of the summarization. So we could include tables, statistics from third-party APIs, pull data from other sources, and build more context into these Q&As, into these various contextual sections that ideally are really useful, updated frequently, because we can revalidate on a regular basis and update these pages without having to have a human go in and make these changes. It's just an automatic update, keeps the content fresh, keeps the content recent. And then, of course, there's always the on-demand content generation based on structured data. So if you have large volumes of structured content information that isn't necessarily would be hard for you to generate 40,000 individual pages for, you could use the AI gateway to expand on that information, build out these pages, provide context and summaries in addition to whatever other information you feed it that surrounds that structured data, and then becomes a large volume of information that these AEs can pull from, that's meaningful, that has enough context to actually be parsable in a useful way. These are all things we're playing with to see ultimately how they will impact whether or not these AEs will pick up different links more readily or not. And that's the gist. Before we take questions, one thing I do want to note, the examples I saw earlier, or you saw earlier, excuse me, were all generated with V0. So that entire demo, there's an entire demo blog article. You can go to the link here. You can see the chat that I used to generate that at this other link here. I'm happy to share these after this presentation. This was a really great way to generate some publicly shareable examples of how we're doing some of these things.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Josh. I think we have a few questions. Jacob, do you want to get started?
Yeah. yeah. Thanks to thanks for such a great demo. There's a lot of stuff there I thought was like a lot of new ideas I'm seeing in the space there that I hadn't really considered for. Like whenever I'm writing content, I always had in my head to keep this as like each piece of content should solve one problem for one person. And then usually that led me away from long form content. But I guess with what you're saying about the auto-generating FAQs and summaries, maybe the prompt that the person is using is their one answer for one problem, and that long form content can even be more powerful these days because it can solve many problems. So.
Oh, absolutely. One of the more interesting things is you can generate, if you had one article, you could potentially generate 3 different pages with 3 different target audiences and have the FAQs that are targeting different audiences, summaries that target different audiences, without you having to write anything else than the article itself.
So one question I had, do AI bots still pay attention to like traditional SEO tools, like structured metadata and sitemaps? Like, do they read those? Are those still important to stay on top of?
It's a great question. The short answer is yes. The long answer is whether or not they do, it's certainly not going to hurt. In the demo that I put together, I actually have a bunch of structured data in the page specifically for that reason. Putting things in like a structured data format, metadata, JSON LD, etc., it's not gonna hurt. It's never gonna hurt things. And if anything, it'll be a net benefit because you're providing stuff in a very machine readable format, so that it becomes less of a hope it reads the information correctly and more of a guarantee it reads the information correctly type of situation.
Cool. So you did share some code for generating article summaries or product callouts. Is that something you do manually, or are you building it into like a CMS somehow? How do you go through the process of refreshing that data?
In terms of refreshing the summaries and the callouts?
Yeah.
So you can actually, there's a few different ways you can approach this. The example that I had shared here, ideally, you can build this right into the template, into the page itself. So if I have a blog article page, I can write prompts, and the prompts I gave in this particular instance were fairly specific to that article, but they can be much more generalized. And you can have those summaries, those FAQs, those callouts generated automatically for any article or blog just by building it as a part of the template page itself. And then if you want to rotate those on a regular basis, all you have to do is revalidate the page, have the page regenerate, which can be done in the background the next time someone visits it, and get fresh callouts, get an updated version of the summary, new FAQs that would be automatically generated. This way, you're not having to maintain them in the CMS. You're not having to update them manually. It just becomes a part of the code base for the site itself. You can, of course, do something like put those FAQs into the CMS or feed it back into the CMS if you want to make them editable to have someone be able to go in and make tweaks to them. But the output of these can be generally solid enough that you can just simply automate the process entirely and have it as a part of the code base that humans don't have to touch.
Okay. So is there kind of just taking advantage of, say, ISR to fully automate the process, and then
Exactly.
just use your ISR schedule to decide when to reprompt?
Exactly. So you could have it reprompt on a hourly basis if you really wanted to. Not that I would recommend that, but a weekly, a monthly basis, you could have the page expire and get revalidated.
Interesting.
We've got a few questions in the chat about just making sure that you shared the links for the demo, and if you wouldn't mind sharing the presentation as well. There was a lot of useful information people want to review, so
Sure.
I'll remind you afterward, but I just want to make sure people know that's happening.
Absolutely.
You shared some tools for kind of like tracking your indexing for SEO, like Otterly and a few others. And so it seems to me those are based on the idea that they will run a bunch of sample prompts and check the response and just see if your company comes up. Is that correct there?
That's generally the way that these things work, because you're not getting a lot of data out about what these things are actually recommending and sort of the internals of how they're actually figuring out what sources to pull from. The best way right now to find out whether or not the changes that you're making are working is putting together prompts that you expect the change you're making to actually react to, and then seeing if that actually works. It means you do ultimately have to come up with a bunch of these prompts yourself, or at least have a good sense of what your customers are potentially searching for, or querying for, I should say. But it's better than nothing.
Are there any new tools in the area that's maybe on your radar for finding out what those prompts might be, or getting a better sense of what customers are actually searching for, or is it still a little in its infancy here?
Nothing, to be honest. I don't know of anything great. I mean, frankly, I still use Google Search Console to figure out some of these things. That's been a pretty decent source for understanding like what queries folks are putting in, even if it's imperfect. At least gives me a jumping off point, and I can start from the keywords or the weird questions that that Google will show me, and then use that to generate a few others. There's not really, unfortunately, a better way, at least as far as I know. I could be wrong. My team might correct me, of finding these questions.
Another question, because we're talking about kind of changing the way that we're thinking about content and writing this. How do we make sure that AI-driven SEO doesn't lead to a bunch of low-quality spammy content, like we've seen with some of the hyper SEO-focused junk websites that pop up?
Yeah, that's a really great point. It's actually one of the things that I've harped on a lot with my team. We have an entire AI policy about how we approach using it, both in our writing, in the way that we talk to our clients, in the way that we build things for ourselves and our clients. But one of the things that I desperately want to avoid is producing a bunch of AI slop. So what I'm not advocating for here is generating entire articles with AI or generating entire pages with AI. What you should be doing is using it as a supplement for the information that you're providing, whether that's an article you've written, a product page with product descriptions that your team has provided, data that your team has collected. And then all you're simply doing is using that AI to summarize it or pull questions out. It's a supplement as opposed to a wholesale just putting AI slop out there by generating content for the sake of generating content, because that serves nobody.
Yeah. Having actual experts produce the main content and then automating the summarization there, I think is a pretty good balance.
Correct.
So I know in Google search, it puts a lot of bias toward like very fresh, very late recent content. Do the AI models do the same thing? Like, would it make sense to regenerate a summary for the exact same piece of material just to get a different phrasing, a different wording, to do that on a different basis to keep the content fresh? Or do you think only when you have new data to pull in?
It's funny. One of the slides earlier in this deck, you can, I show an example of generating a bunch of different versions of a summary. And so you can do that. And at least the content, the summary itself would stay fresh. In theory, you could then update updated that timestamp as a part of that article. Whether or not the bots are able to detect that is really going to depend on the level of variance between version A and version B and version C of that summary. If they all look pretty similar, even tools like Google will often figure that out and filter it out and say this content hasn't changed significantly enough. So it's a tactic worth trying, especially if you can get enough variety or have it summarize different sections of the content and have that rotate periodically. But, other than that, having it re-summarize things when content changes, when you have new data, new products to show off is obviously going to be the best, bar none.
Good advice. We had another question from the chat. We've kind of talked about some of the tools available, but this question is, what would you like to see on the market? What tools are missing for AI SEO?
I think the one that we just touched on briefly before was finding a way to really understand the questions, the queries that folks are putting in. Obviously, it's an incredibly hard thing to build a product around. I'm not sure if that's even possible at the current moment in time, given that we have so little data on the questions folks are putting in. OpenAI mostly seems to keep that information to itself, and I don't blame them. I'm not sure personally I'd want to see all the queries folks are putting into OpenAI, ChatGPT. That's probably one of the most useful things. And then really just more of this monitoring, being able to get a better sense of if I make changes over time, being able to pinpoint what change I made when, and then whether or not that had an impact. If I have something rotating on a regular basis automatically, and I have different prompts rotating through and pages regenerating on a weekly or monthly basis, being able to know that I made X change at X point in time, and then from that point to the next change, these were the results based on the queries. Sort of like how you can mark points in time on Google Analytics when you made certain changes. It's really helpful to be able to see if I could be able to provide even automatically, this change happened at this point in time. This page regenerated at this point in time, and then it did or did not show up in these queries. Would really help pinpoint like what is and is not working more finely.
The other question I have, kind of related to tools. So you mentioned things that you're using with Vercel, ISR, the firewall, Edge Network, and AI Gateway. But were there any things that you maybe ran into a tricky spot and you have some feedback for us? Because I want to make sure that we collect that too from somebody who I know is actually using this quite a bit.
Honestly, the thing that I ran into when I was working on this V0 demo was the AI Gateway environment variable not being pulled in. I was able to publish it's fine because I was able to publish the page, but I did run into a funny little, I don't know if it's a bug, an issue, but that was one thing I did run into. Outside of that, honestly, all the Vercel tools that we've been using, we've been very happy with. It's really easy to toggle them on and off, make changes, makes my team happy. Because frankly, DevOps is nobody on my team's favorite subject matter. So the less of it we have to do, the better.
Good feedback. Thank you.
All right, it looks like that's the end of our questions here. So yeah, thank you so much, Josh, for coming on to give us this demo. I know I learned a lot, and I think everyone else did too. So yeah, we have another community session coming up next week on Wednesday, September 3rd, talking about web performance with Dom Sipowicz. So if you want to build faster websites, please be sure to come in and check that out. And until then, we'll see you in the community.